A few years ago, I got the opportunity to travel to Israel. Can you give me that next slide? And this was one of the places that I went to. It was the very first day of our trip, and we got picked up very early in the morning. And a bus took us, the group that I was with, down this area that was gated. Not the gated community that you're accustomed to seeing in the United States, but this was a gated community because everyone that went in and went out was living along what they call the Gaza Strip, around the Gaza, around that border that divides Israel and Gaza. So you couldn't just drive into this neighborhood. But we got the opportunity to go to this place, and I remember pulling up to this house. We were going to visit with a woman, Rami. Rami brought us in, and when we were walking up through the pathway to her house, you could see just different warfare, sort of like ornaments, just placed, like the capsules of bombs and what do you call those things? When you shoot something, the artillery, and then you see the bullets and you see things. And there was sort of, it wasn't perfectly lined up, but there was sort of these things just all over the place. And I thought, man, that is interesting. She brought us to a room where she did this beautiful pottery. All this kind of work. It was sort of like our safe haven within the space of her home. And there she began to share some of her story about her family, about some of the relationships that they had, why she would do pottery. And she brought us to this little room where we couldn't go in. But she says, if the siren rings, you have 14 seconds to make it to this room. And I thought, 14 seconds? It takes me 14 seconds to get up. And she also said, you'd be surprised what you can do in 14 seconds. She said, so if you hear the siren blow, you want to run as fast as you can because it means that there's missiles, that there's firing that is going on. So we began to ask questions like, well, how long has this been going on and how often does it happen? And she is casually responding to these questions, giving us the information that we need, but also making us very much aware that this has become the norm of life and this is the way that they live and it's no fun. At one point I asked Rami, why don't you leave? Why are you here? Why don't you move? Why don't you go elsewhere? Why don't you even leave the country? Why would you stay living in these conditions? And her response has marked my life forever. This is what she said. Where would I go? Everything I love and own is here. And yes, at any moment, our life can come to an end. But the neighbor that's right here, this is who this person is. And the neighbor that's right here, and then there's a little village that's a little further up. And when we get the opportunity, we all gather together and we have these wonderful celebrations and everybody cooks and everybody brings something to the table and it is a wonderful time. And she told us, and across that wall are some of our neighbors who lived right here in this community and were forced to now become our enemies. But we loved them because they were first our neighbors, continue to be part of relationships that we have established and that we just can't let go. I thought to myself at the moment, I have no concept at all about this type of relationship, about this closeness of a relationship where this one person would choose to remain in such a difficult predicament based on the fact that there is a community there that rallies around each other, that provides this support to each other, that has established this type of relationship that she could not even conceive in her mind the possibility of going elsewhere. That's powerful. Even given the opportunity, even having the option, her preference would be to stay despite the difficulties of it. And of course, similar to our Lord Jesus Christ, the relationship that Jesus has for us, with us, it is that connectivity. It is that sense. The purpose wasn't to die on the cross for the sake of dying on the cross. The purpose of death on the cross was with the meaning of trying to bring salvation unto us, a reconciliation to a relationship between the triune God and creation. The purpose of it was us. It was the relationship established. It was because of us. So I've been thinking about that and wondering what needs to happen. How do we begin to process in order for us to be most effective? What is it that we need to process to think about in terms of our relationship? And that's the angle that I'd like to talk about. So I want us to think and examine and rethink our relational ability. So is relational ability, our ability to be relational. How we are defining our relationships and how do we live out these relationships? Because I think it is important for us to pay attention to what shapes the way that we are in relationship with people and the way that we are in relationship as institutions. So it's real easy for me to view the relational component from Aniantaya, from you and I, how we relate to each other. But there's a component that is important in terms of the relational capacity that an institution, an organization, a community ministry has with a church, which I think is part of the underlying aspect and the beauty of what we've just seen Alex and Bo be able to demonstrate. Yes, you can clearly see their relationship on a personal level and see how that relationship has transpired and has an impact on what? The level of the organizations. College West as an organization and Senda de Vida as an organization, the level of impact that those personal relationships have had with them. So I want to start by asking you the question, why is this important? How we live with each other matters. Why? These are a few of my own personal reasons. Fam, the U.S. population has changed. It is not the same that it was before. By 2045, minority will be majority. It is a totally different scenario. By 2045, the majority of the population will be composed of people from different countries that have come to live in the United States. The way that you respond, think, or whatever makes you feel in terms of your tummy when you hear that is already an indication of what that means for you in terms of relationship. When I hear this message of majority and minority and the change and the flip that is going on, one of the first things that comes to my mind is, are we ready as a minority people to begin acting as a majority people? Because as something that Alex alluded to, right? Alex, man, I call what has happened to Alex an Acts 10 transformational experience just as much. The Spirit of God has come upon that brother and transformed his way of thinking in such a way that it is a model worthy of following and duplicating. It's awesome. The reality is, as Dr. Ben said, man, we've got to work on multiplying. Not Alex for his Alex sake, because if you know anything about him, esa no es la patita donde colea, ¿verdad? That is not his area. It's not his prideful. That's not what God's working in him. It's for the sake of being able to introduce other models and other people, another way of thinking this. Why? Because the times have changed. We're not living in the same perspective. And one of the things that I constantly do as an educator is try and shift the mindset of the students to being able to think of themselves worthy of who they've been created by God to be. The first time I worked as a Director of Education for Latino Latinas at Wesley Seminary and as Assistant Dean of Global Theological Education. We partnered with global partners to go into Colombia. Such a beautiful experience. When we began this partnership with Colombia, the whole intention was to be able to create a platform so they could get their Master of Divinity in Spanish. Part of the work that I came in to do with Wesley Seminary was not a translation piece. When I was brought on board, one of the things we immediately agreed upon is we're not translating this because we don't need Western pastors in Colombia. We don't need them here either. If they're Hispanic pastors pastoring Hispanic churches, we need Hispanic training for those Hispanic pastors so that they can respond to the realities that they are dealing with in their own context. And so part of the model was being able to do this partnership where we would offer theological education in Colombia that was relevant to the students in Colombia. One of the main things that I had to work through with those students was helping them understand, get ready for this, that the textbooks in English were not better than the textbooks in Spanish. Because the mindset was that whatever they could get in English was going to be better than what they could get in Spanish. Now, you have to understand that this is part of a colonialistic mindset. It's intellectual colonialization. It is not anything that the Colombians or any of our other Latin American countries started with. It is part of the Crusades. It is part of the stories. It is part of our Western thinking. What it started, now we have to undo and learn from a new perspective and a new approach. So the reason why being able to establish mutual healthy partnerships of outreach are important is because of what Alex said. We have the opportunity to give back, to be able to then straighten out the paths that have appeared themselves as crooked so that we can provide education, so that we can provide opportunity, so that we can provide this unification between two bodies that may be totally different within itself. What I want to tell you is that the U.S. population has changed. And because the U.S. population has changed, so we need to rethink on how we are doing and establishing our relationships with others. The other thing I want to tell you is that Christianity has changed. The face of Christianity is no longer a male. The face of Christianity is no longer a white person. The face of Christianity is no longer from the Western world. It is an Africana mujer, right? Who is the face of Christianity. So what does that mean for our relationships? How many relationships are we engaging with, right? What are the partnerships that we are establishing within itself? The other thing I want to mention quickly is that missions has changed. It's polycentric. One of the big themes for global partners right now is from everywhere to everywhere. And I would add, by everyone to everyone. Some of the most amazing work that is going on in Venezuela right now are by Muslim brothers and sisters. Don't go crazy on me. We have to wrestle with these things. They are part of our reality. But it's polycentric now. There's a center everywhere. It is not one center, not one particular place where things are happening. It's from everywhere to everywhere. Communication has changed. Technology has changed us and has an impact on how we do relationships, how we interact with each other. The last thing that I want to mention along those lines is Generation Z. Do you know them? I live with one. The other days, my daughter was on the sofa with two friends. This is a love sofa. It's small, so they're right on top of each other, like elbows on top of each other. As they're sitting down, all three of them have their phone. They're texting each other on the phone, sitting right next to each other, and then they do one of these. Oh, I never said that. That's not what I was talking about. You're so silly. They're talking to each other, having a dual conversation, one out loud and one on their mobile phone. It's the same conversation though. Right? So I thought at first, this must be happening because I am in the room and they're trying to say things that they don't want me to hear. So I asked them, are you saying, is this a secret or something? No. Then why aren't you just having the conversation out loud? We are, right? Their whole mindset was that this is the way that they communicate with each other. The way that they invest into relationship is sitting with each other, having their technology on hand, and still being able to have a conversation. My daughter attends Campus Life. It is a ministry at schools, an after-school club. And for a few weeks, I heard her say, I don't want to go to Campus Life. And I'm like, why not? So she said this, my friends aren't going. I'm a Gen Xer. I'm like, not in my household. That does not even happen, right? Because I grew up where we didn't even get asked if we wanted to go to Campus Life. Automatically, you were going to Campus Life. And it had nothing to do with friends. It was just part of the reality, right? You went there because you're going to buscarle Dios y su presencia, and God is going to come down and minister to your life, and that's the reason why you go there. So by the third time, I questioned her, and I said, why are you basing your decision on your friends, whether they go or whether they don't? And she told me this, Mom, after we do the Bible study and we have the discussion, we get into small groups. Who am I going to pour my soul out to? Not just anyone. I do that with my friends. What she was teaching me at the moment is that relationship. The reason why she wasn't wanting to be there is because she didn't have anybody then to be able to have this conversation with. And so relationship for her was the opportunity to take whatever she was learning and be able to live this out with the group of friends that now she can bear her soul to. If we don't start to make the shifts and recognize that the times have changed, we will continue to use the same models of partnership, the same models of building relationship that we have always used. But the times are not the same. Scripture talks about new wine. You can't put new wine in old wineskins. You have to be able to put new wine in new wineskins. And somehow we have to be able to make the shift and recognize that we need new models of partnerships, or at least give ourselves the opportunity to examine the models of partnerships that we have had. So we need to get to a place where we begin to consider, okay, this model that Alex has proposed to us, right? How do we take this and begin to work on it? How do we begin to propagate these behaviors that contribute then to establishing some healthier partnerships? How do we shift our minds? And the question begins with you. How are your relationships? What kind of relationships do you have? Who are the people that you are surrounded with? How are you contributing into making pathways and creating stronger relationships? Who are you in partnership with, right? And so this mutual aspect for me is very interesting because it means, Jordan, that you're not on your own. It's you and me. It means that my interests are important to you and your interests are important to me. It means that we're going to work on this together, that we're not going to try or attempt to do things simply because we think it's the way to go. Urbana, is anyone familiar with Urbana? Urbana had their conference last year, and during the Urbana conference, they had a lower attendance than they typically do. One of the reasons why they believe they had the lower attendance has to do with the fact that Gen Zers are not interested in missions in the same way that even Gen Xers were interested in missions. The underlying reason has to do with the relational aspect of it. The distance between them being able to understand, well, what can I do to help people that are so far away? That's why I think it's brilliant to have those small groups and to pair up the young people in Mexico with those that are coming from College Wesleyan to begin to see what is the benefit, what is the mutual benefit of them being able to come together. So in reality, what is this about? If we don't begin to make these shifts, the gospel of Jesus Christ is affected by it. This is about advancing the gospel of Jesus Christ and the opportunity that we do have. So in examining our relational ability of our outreach models, then my questions for you are, what are the models that you have? What is the model that you're using? Is it a dependent model, being that we make all the decisions and impose those decisions? Is it an independent model, that we give money and then we disappear? Really, one of the prevalent models is this independent model. If we're able to put the resources in the hands of someone in another country or another ministry and we can disappear, then we have the sense that we have accomplished something, that it is done. But missions is never done. There's always work to be done. Outreach is not something that comes to an end. There is work that will continuously need to be done. And having the responsibility and the sense of urgency upon us to understand that is part of the calling that God has placed in every single one of us to be faithful with. So the independent model in terms of being able to say, okay, you go ahead and do your own thing is not the healthiest way to go. The interdependent model that we have been talking about, that we have seen showcased here in this place, is one that allows for that collaboration, for the unification of it to come together. And some of the ways that I think that we have the opportunity to assess this. Chip, can you move my PowerPoint? Keep going. Stop right there. Go back. It's talking about orientations. I can't really see that. So, from a leadership perspective, there's two things. It's called relationship-oriented and task-oriented, right? There are different models. Contingency models is what they're called. Situational leadership, different kinds of models. But I bring this before you because I think part of what we need to do is to assess where we're at. What is our starting point? Are we relationship-oriented or are we task-oriented? What kind of leader are you? And so a relationship-oriented leader has an emphasis on the interaction versus the task-oriented, which is focused on the work. And then relationship versus structure, roles, and tasks. And then positive relationships versus desired results. And then the emphasis on team members and communication versus the emphasis on goal settings and a clear plan to achieve goals. Communication, facilitation, casual interactions and frequent team meetings, and strict use of schedules and step-by-step plans and a punishment incentive system. So here it is. Knowing where we fall is of utterance important. Whether you are a relationship-oriented leader or you are a task-oriented leader, you have to know that. It is important to know where you fall. If you are a relationship-oriented leader, then you are going to be able to contribute to these relationships being relationship-oriented. If you are a task-oriented leader, then you know that you need to build a team of people that will come alongside of you to help you then be relational in the way that you interact. So these things are very important from that perspective. So just take 2 minutes at your table and be honest with yourself as you even look at that. Are you relational oriented or are you task oriented? And before I let you do that, I think the important thing here for you to understand is that task is not a negative thing. We need tasks, we need the projects, we need to be able to do the work. So it's not that task is a negative thing, it's the balance of the task with the people, right? If you balance these two things, how do they fall? So I don't want you to feel that if you're a task-oriented person, that makes you an awful leader, an awful person. On the contrary, you need to know that you're a task-oriented leader so that you bring alongside of you the kind of people that you need to help balance that out. So take 2 minutes, take a look at this, and then talk amongst yourself. Are you relationship-oriented or task-oriented? Okay, so now spend a minute or two talking. The organization, the church, the ministry that you represent, if you were to categorize the orientation, is it people-focused or is it a task-focused organization? The way that you do things, is it more focused on the benefit of the people in order to be able to advance, grow people, or is it more focused on what the task or even look at the mission statement of the organization? So when you think of the organization, the church that you're a part of, is it relationship-oriented or is it more task-oriented? Go. Okay, so then sometimes it's easier to take into consideration who we are, to evaluate that, but we don't always evaluate where the organization may be, where the church may be. But that also determines what is going to be done, right? If it's project-oriented, then that's what has the impact of going and trying to do partnership, missions, local or global partnership, from the perspective of that, what can I give you? In Spanish, I call that la teología del ay bendito. The poor me, what can I get, what can I gain from you? And so the culture of the church has an impact on the way that the church then does its mission projects, the way that the church interacts with the local community, the type of partnerships that are built. So it's just as important for us to know if we are people-oriented leaders or if we are task-oriented leaders, and if we're in a team that is people-oriented, task-oriented, if we're in a church that is people-oriented or task-oriented. Because if we're going to be missional about the work that we are doing, then we know we want to bring together people who are missional-oriented to balance that out and then be effective of what is being done. Now, these are two, I don't know how clear you can see them, but there's a high task-oriented and a low task-oriented and a high relational oriented and a low relational oriented. And so one is Berkman and one is DISC. Probably something that you have done before. Knowing how to use that will be very instrumental and helpful as you seek to build those partnerships. The new thing is the Enneagram, right? And so knowing, does this place you within the giftedness of people who are people-oriented, right? Who care about the relationships more than their focus is on the task. And so it's using what you already have in order to be able to provide the support that you need to build to contribute to it. Emily, can you give me the next one? That's the low task, high relationship. Okay, next. All right, the other thing that I want to suggest to work on is emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence has 4 quadrants. 2 of them are the self-awareness and how you change your own behavior. And the other 2 have to do with people and the community that you work with. So as you evaluate your partnership, what is the level of emotional intelligence that goes into that as well? I think I'm out of time. What's my next one? Okay. So I use this as a figure, and it's almost strange to a certain degree to see the heart. But this is what it's about. It's about love. It's about the core of it. It's about that relationship, about caring and loving each other enough. It is about extending ourselves beyond what the norm has been, and really establishing the relationships that we need in order to be effective. So I'm going to be vulnerable with you and share with you something that happened to me this morning. Right before I got here, my presentation crashed. My PowerPoint crashed completely. I did not get to print it out. I did not get to do save it on the thumb drive. And when I went to just put it on the thumb drive to bring here, the computer went, ee. So I want to end that way because that's relational to me. So I take very seriously what I do, and I am very much invested in people. And I think that vulnerability has to be a part of what we do in the process of it. And so I ask you for grace this morning as I try and juggle and at least share in the midst of my frustration and my want to pull my hair out moment, try to be transparent with you and tell you that life happens, man. It happens to me just like it happens to you. And these stuff happens sometimes in partnerships as well, where, man, you're all ready to go into something and you think that you've done all the work that you need to do, and then all of a sudden you find out, like, oops, there it is. It just disappeared. Partnerships are hard. Mutual relationships are hard. Me being vulnerable with you, I speak all the time. This doesn't come easy to me, to have to tell you, man, I was in trouble this morning, right? It's up to you to decide what you're going to do with that, right? But this stuff is hard. This relational stuff is not easy. Why? You could take what I just said and do something totally crazy with my vulnerability and my transparency, right? Or you could take it for what it's worth. When Peter has this transformational experience right before God, I mean, his whole mindset is changed. Even the Gentiles. However, a few chapters later, what happens with Peter? Man, Paul has to call him on it and said, dude, you already forgot? You already forgot the relational experience that you had? So I want to leave you with that. Man, there's been some really core stuff. You don't need to hear anything else from me. What has been shared already here, it is some real awesome core examples of mutual, beneficial, healthy partnerships that honor God and honor God's people. And really, we've had the opportunity to sit in a banquet and really, really benefit from all of this. And so my prayer for you is that you will find out who you are as a leader, who you represent as an organization, who you are in partnership with, and that you would make a shift so that you do not continue to use the same models that we have used to try and reach a new generation of people, the same models that you have always used to try and build new partnerships, but that you would give yourself to recognizing that God is doing something greater than we can ever imagine, and we get to be a part of that. So I leave you with my vulnerability, la paz de Dios sobre cada uno de ustedes. Hasta aquí mi parte, que el Señor les bendiga.